"I need space," my boyfriend said. So I changed the locks before he came home, and he never saw it coming. My name is Claire Bennett, and I was 31 years old when my boyfriend asked me to give him space. So I gave him more than he expected. "I need some time to think," Ethan said over the phone. "Please don't call me." His voice carried none of the hesitation I would have expected from a man ending a 3-year relationship, even temporarily. He sounded impatient, almost rehearsed, as though he had practiced the words until they no longer made him feel guilty. I stood in the kitchen of the apartment we had shared for nearly 2 years, staring at the dinner, cooling between 2 untouched plates. "How much time?" I asked. "I don't know, Claire. A few days." He exhaled sharply. "This is exactly why I need space. You always need an answer immediately." I lowered my eyes to the second plate. I had made his favorite pasta because he had promised he would be home by 7. At 8:30, he texted that something had come up. At 9:15, he called to tell me not to contact him. "I'm not asking you to decide our entire future tonight," I said. "I'm asking whether you're coming home." Another pause followed, but it wasn't the hesitation of someone struggling to find the right words. Behind him, I heard traffic, distant music, and a woman's laugh. "Who's with you?" "No one." I heard someone. "You heard people. I'm outside." "Where?" His voice hardened. "Claire, stop interrogating me." I said I need space. The call ended before I could answer. I stood motionless in the kitchen, my phone still pressed to my ear. The apartment suddenly felt unfamiliar. Ethan's jacket hung over a chair, his running shoes sat by the balcony door, and the coffee mug he'd promised to wash that morning still rested beside the sink. I told myself this was temporary. Couples went through difficult weeks. He would cool down, come home, and apologize. At least that was what I wanted to believe. I covered the untouched dinner, put it in the refrigerator, and slept on the couch because our bedroom suddenly felt too empty. The next morning, I sent one message. "I'll respect what you asked for. Please let me know you're safe." He read it at 8:12. He never replied. By afternoon, I'd stopped waiting for my phone and buried myself in work. At 6 that evening, Mia sent me a screenshot. No explanation. Just a photograph. Ethan stood barefoot on a beach at sunset wearing the linen shirt I'd bought him for our anniversary, his arm around Olivia Hayes. His ex. The woman he'd spent years telling me not to worry about. She leaned comfortably against him while he smiled with an ease I'd barely seen in months. Her caption read, "Sometimes you have to return to the person who always understood you." Ethan had left a heart beneath it. I zoomed in until the image blurred. Olivia wore his sunglasses, 2 cocktails sat behind them, and a resort wristband circled Ethan's wrist. He hadn't gone somewhere alone to think. He'd planned a vacation, boarded a flight, checked into a resort, and taken his ex with him. The trip required planning. His request for space didn't. I expected to cry. Instead, a strange calm settled over me. The photo didn't reveal the truth. It only stripped away the last excuse I'd been clinging to. Olivia had never really left our relationship. Her name lit up Ethan's phone during dinner. She called after midnight because she was having a difficult week, and she somehow appeared at birthdays, office gatherings, and dinners where no one else invited former partners. Whenever I questioned it, Ethan made me feel unreasonable. "She's been in my life since college. You knew we were friends before we started dating. Not every woman who talks to me wants to sleep with me." After Olivia called 3 nights in a row, I asked how he'd feel if one of my exes did the same. He laughed. "You don't have friendships like mine and Olivia's." Back then, I thought he meant they were unusually close. Looking at that beach photo, I finally understood he meant the rules only applied to me. The warning signs had been there for months. Ethan started turning his phone face down, cancelled our plans whenever Olivia needed help, and skipped my company's awards dinner, claiming he had food poisoning, only for Olivia to post a photo with him at a bar that same night. When I confronted him, he insisted the picture was old. I wanted to believe him badly enough to ignore the date beneath it. Love had made me patient. Fear had made me blind. I opened Ethan's latest story. It showed the ocean from a hotel balcony, with Olivia's reflection visible in the glass. The caption read, "Finally breathing." I let out a quiet laugh. 3 years earlier, Ethan had moved into my apartment with 2 suitcases, promising it was only temporary after his landlord sold the building. He never left. His clothes filled my closets, his things spread through every room, and little by little, his preferences became the rules of my home. I stopped buying floral candles because he hated the scent, wore headphones while cooking because he wanted quiet, and saw my friends less because he said they judged him. Yet now he was telling the world I'd kept him from breathing. I looked back at the photo of his hand around Olivia's waist and whispered, "You're right." I wasn't heartbroken anymore. I was done waiting for Ethan to decide whether I was worth coming back to. If he wanted space from our relationship and every responsibility that came with it, he could have it. I walked into the bedroom and opened the closet. Most of his clothes were still there, but his suitcase, a few shirts, and the expensive watch he only wore when traveling were gone. More proof that the trip had been planned long before our phone call. I wasn't changing the locks because Ethan had asked for space. I was changing them because the beach photos proved he'd already ended our relationship without having the courage to say it. On the top shelf sat the folder containing the apartment paperwork. Every document, the deed, utilities, insurance, and maintenance records, was in my name. Ethan had lived there. He had never owned it. After the building manager confirmed that Ethan wasn't listed as an owner or authorised resident, I called a 24-hour locksmith. I need every lock changed tonight. 35 minutes later, an older locksmith arrived, confirmed I owned the apartment, and quietly got to work. Standing in the hallway, I listened to the steady click of metal as each turn of his screwdriver felt like another tie to the relationship being removed. When he handed me the new keys, I thanked him, locked the door behind him, and realised something unexpected. For the first time in months, the apartment felt like mine again. That night, I wandered through the quiet apartment. Ethan's gaming headset, hoodie, and charger were still scattered around the living room, silent reminders of how completely he'd settled into a home he'd always assumed would be waiting for him, including me. Back in the bedroom, I began packing. 3 years of clothes, gifts, and shared memories filled the closet. The first shirt I folded was the navy button-down I'd bought after his promotion. "You always know exactly what I need," he told me that night. I placed it into a box, then another shirt, and another. I expected to feel angry. Instead, I felt lighter. With every box I sealed, another piece of the life I'd been carrying for both of us finally slipped from my shoulders. By midnight, the bedroom floor had disappeared beneath neatly stacked boxes filled with Ethan's clothes, books, golf clubs, toiletries, and the espresso machine he'd insisted we buy, even though I preferred ordinary coffee. I packed everything carefully, not for him, but because I refused to let his betrayal decide the kind of person I became. When I opened the nightstand, I found a framed photo from our first vacation together. We were standing beside a mountain lake, smiling at a future I thought we shared. Halfway through dinner that night, Olivia had called. "I'm sorry," Ethan had said, already standing. "She sounds upset." He spent 40 minutes outside while I finished the meal alone, then promised it would never happen again. I slipped the photo into the final box. Some promises, I realised, were easier to pack away than keep. By 1 a.m, the last box sat in the living room. The apartment hadn't changed much, but it already felt emptier in a different way. Ethan's belongings were still there, yet his place in my life had quietly disappeared. Memories surfaced. Olivia's constant interruptions, the broken promises, and every argument that somehow ended with me apologising. For years, I'd mistaken exhaustion for compromise. Now I finally understood the difference. The next morning, I took a personal day, rented a small moving van, and spent the next hour loading every remaining box. When I locked the apartment behind me, there wasn't a single belonging of Ethan's left inside. This time, turning the key felt like closing a chapter instead of waiting for one. Margaret Cole answered the door wearing gardening gloves. Her surprise faded the moment she noticed the moving van. "Claire, what happened?" "Ethan needed some space," I said evenly. He just forgot to mention he was spending it at a beach resort with Olivia. For a split second, guilt crossed her face. She hadn't known everything, but she hadn't been completely surprised either. "Oh, Claire, I thought these belonged with his family." She stepped aside without another question. "I'll help you." Together we carried the boxes into her garage in near silence. When we finished, Margaret sighed. "I wish he'd handled this differently." "So do I." Margaret hesitated. "Did he actually end the relationship?" "No, he only said he needed space." Her expression tightened. "You knew about Olivia?" I asked. I knew she'd started calling again. "For how long?" "A few months." While Ethan kept insisting there was nothing to worry about, even his mother knew. Olivia had returned to his life. "I'm sorry," Margaret said. "I kept hoping he'd put a stop to it before anyone got hurt." I glanced at the boxes stacked in her garage. He had plenty of chances. On the drive home, the uncertainty that had followed me for months was finally gone. The beach photographs weren't a misunderstanding or a mistake made during a difficult week. They were simply the final chapter of a story that had been falling apart for months. I didn't need answers anymore. I already had them. Back at the apartment, the silence felt different too. I opened every window, replaced the sheets, lit the floral candles Ethan hated, and listed his oversized recliner for donation. By evening, the apartment no longer looked like the home we'd built together. It looked like mine again. That night, instead of rereading old messages, I opened my laptop. For years, Ethan had insisted expensive vacations could wait. "We'll travel later." "We need to save. Maybe next year." Apparently, next year arrived the moment Olivia asked. I searched for somewhere warm with an ocean view and booked a first-class ticket to Maui before I could second-guess myself. After clicking confirm, I leaned back and smiled. It wasn't revenge. It was permission to stop waiting for someone else's priorities to include me. Just then my phone buzzed. Ethan had posted another photo. He and Olivia sat at an oceanside cafe, smiling as though nothing had ever happened. The caption read, "Some people don't appreciate what they have until it's gone." I looked at it for a moment before quietly laughing. Oh, finally got one thing right. The only difference was that he still had no idea which one of us those words would eventually describe. 3 days later, I woke before sunrise to an apartment that was finally peaceful instead of lonely. I packed a few clothes, sandals, headphones, and the novel that had been gathering dust on my nightstand for months. Ethan used to tease me for buying books I never finished, never realizing my free time was spent keeping his entire life organized, from bills and appointments to birthdays, groceries, and travel. This time I carried one suitcase containing nothing but my own belongings. Before leaving, I paused at the front door, tested the new lock one last time, and headed downstairs. The airport was crowded, yet I moved through it with an ease I hadn't expected. No one knew I'd spent the past week dismantling a 3-year relationship one cardboard box at a time. To everyone around me, I was simply a woman traveling alone, and there was something liberating about that. I ordered a coffee and settled beside the windows when my phone buzzed. Ethan. It was the first time he'd contacted me since asking for space. Hope you're respecting what I asked for. I'll reach out when I'm ready. I read the message twice. While vacationing with his ex and posting photos of them together, he still believed he controlled the terms of our relationship. He expected freedom for himself and loyalty from me. Without replying, I muted the conversation and turned my phone over. Claire! I looked up to find Daniel Mercer standing beside my table with a laptop bag and coffee in hand. We worked in different departments at the same consulting firm, and he was one of the few people in the office who listened more than he spoke. Heading to Maui? He asked. I smiled. It was a last-minute decision. So was mine. The conference got moved up. After I invited him to sit, our conversation drifted naturally from work to travel. When he noticed the novel beside my coffee, he smiled. You've been carrying that book around the office for months. You noticed? You always make it 2 pages before someone needs you. I laughed. That sounds about right. Maybe the universe finally gave you time to finish it. The comment stayed with me. Ethan had always joked about the things I never had time to do. Daniel noticed why I never had the time. We talked until boarding. He never asked why I was traveling alone or why I'd booked the trip so suddenly, and that quiet respect felt more comforting than forced sympathy. At the gate, we discovered we were both seated in row 3, right beside each other. My laughter came naturally. 2 hours into the flight, Daniel worked on his laptop while I finally opened my book. When the flight attendant offered champagne, I accepted. Ethan used to insist champagne gave me headaches, even though I'd never said that. It was simply another preference of his that had quietly become one of my supposed dislikes. I took a sip. No headache, only relief. After the seatbelt sign switched off, I connected to the onboard Wi-Fi. 14 missed calls, all from Ethan. Then the messages appeared. What did you do? Why doesn't my key work? My stuff is gone. My mom says you dropped everything at her house. Call me now. He was home. The vacation had ended sooner than I'd expected. For a moment, I pictured him standing outside the apartment, turning a key that no longer belonged to his life. What I felt wasn't satisfaction, it was certainty. He'd truly believed he could leave with Olivia, tell me not to contact him, then come back whenever he was ready. My phone rang again. Daniel glanced over. You don't have to answer. I know. I declined the call and listened to the voicemail instead. Claire, what the hell is wrong with you? You can't just change the locks and move my things without talking to me. I said I needed space, not that we were over. Call me before you make this worse. I deleted the voicemail without replaying it. He wasn't calling to apologize or explain the photos. He was angry because, for the first time, I had made a decision without asking his permission. A second voicemail arrived. His voice was different this time. Look, nothing happened with Olivia. She was going through something and I needed time to think. You've completely overreacted. Call me. I removed the earbud. Daniel closed his laptop. Bad news? An old problem discovering it no longer has a key. He studied me for a moment before nodding. That sounds expensive. It cost 1 locksmith and a moving van. A faint smile crossed his face, but he didn't ask for an explanation. My phone vibrated again. Who are you with? A second message followed almost immediately. Are you seriously on vacation right now? I couldn't help smiling at the hypocrisy. Ethan had spent days on a beach with Olivia, yet the idea that I might be traveling without him suddenly filled him with outrage. As Daniel reached into the overhead compartment, I noticed his blazer sleeve beside my champagne glass. On impulse, I opened the camera and took a picture of the clouds outside the window, my book, the glass of champagne, and just enough of his sleeve to suggest I wasn't alone. I sent it with a single sentence. You asked for space. Now we both have plenty. The typing indicator appeared, disappeared, then returned before my phone started ringing again. I switched it to airplane mode. Daniel settled back into his seat. Everything okay? I looked out at the sunlight stretching across the clouds. It is now. The rest of the flight passed quietly. I read, enjoyed my champagne, and talked with someone who never mocked my opinions or made me compete for his attention. Daniel wasn't replacing anyone. He simply reminded me how effortless conversation could feel when it was built on respect instead of control. After we landed, my phone exploded with missed calls, angry texts, and one final voicemail. You're doing this to punish me, Ethan said. When you calm down, you're going to regret humiliating me like this. I deleted it after one listen. He still believed this was about hurting him. It wasn't. I was simply building a life where his feelings no longer dictated my choices. Outside the airport, warm island air greeted us. My shuttle's over there, Daniel said. Yours? I pointed toward another bus. Opposite direction. He smiled. Then I'll see you at the conference. Maybe. He laughed. I think you're finally learning how to take a vacation. As I climbed aboard, one last message from Ethan appeared. You're going to regret replacing me. I put my phone away without replying. No one had replaced him. I had simply stopped saving a place for him. The conference lasted 3 days. Between workshops, client meetings, and dinners with colleagues, I gradually stopped reaching for my phone every few minutes, expecting another argument. Daniel was usually part of the group, never demanding attention yet somehow making everyone feel included. One evening, as we walked back from dinner, he glanced at me. You've smiled more today than you did during the last 6 months at work. You noticed? I noticed you always smiled, he said. It just never reached your eyes. I was quiet for a moment before admitting, I think I forgot what relaxed feels like. He didn't offer advice or criticize Ethan. I hope you don't forget again. His kindness was so effortless that it reminded me how long I'd lived without it. When I returned home the following week, the apartment greeted me with fresh air and sandalwood instead of Ethan's cologne. Nothing had changed, yet everything felt different. Calm was beginning to feel ordinary. I replaced chaos with peace. The following Monday, life settled back into its routine of meetings, deadlines, and conference reports. Work no longer felt like somewhere I escaped. It felt like somewhere I belonged. Ethan, however, refused to disappear. He started with emails, then longer emails, and finally handwritten letters. The first read, Claire, you're acting like I cheated on you. Nothing happened between Olivia and me. I only needed time to think. We were already having problems. I folded it before reaching the end. He still thought the beach photos were the problem. They weren't. The betrayal had started long before that. The photos had only exposed it. 4 days later, another letter arrived. Can we please meet? You're making decisions while you're emotional. I actually laughed. After everything he'd done, he still believed I was the irrational one. In his mind, I'd acted out of anger. The truth was, I'd never been calmer. In the weeks that followed, mutual friends began reaching out. Most meant well. Maybe you should hear his side. He says it's all a misunderstanding. He looks miserable. One Saturday, Mia sat across from me in my kitchen, stirring cream into her coffee. I ran into Ethan. I waited. He asked if you'd blocked his number. I have. He also wanted to know if you're dating Daniel. I frowned. We attended the same conference. I know. He just happened to sit next to me on the plane. Mia smiled. Ethan doesn't care about that. She set down her cup. He cares because you're no longer chasing him. After she left, her words stayed with me. She was right. Ethan wasn't struggling because he'd lost the relationship. He was struggling because he'd lost control over me. 2 weeks later, Margaret called. I thought you deserved to know, she said quietly. Ethan isn't living with Olivia anymore. The news surprised me less than it should have. What happened? They've been fighting constantly. Once the vacation ended, real life took over. They argued about everything they'd ignored while pretending a beach resort was real life. I've never seen him this unhappy, Margaret admitted. Looking out my office window, I realized I felt neither satisfaction nor pity. Some consequences arrived without needing an audience. Another month passed and life settled into a rhythm of work, morning runs, dinners with friends, weekend farmers markets, and Thursday guitar lessons. One evening, an unknown number texted me. Please, don't block this one. I know I don't deserve your time, but I need to explain. It was Ethan. I set the phone aside. 5 minutes later, another message arrived. Olivia and I are over. I ignored that one too. His relationship status no longer had anything to do with my life. 3 days later, Margaret called again. I'm sorry, she said. Ethan moved back home yesterday. So things with Olivia are over. Completely. I think he confused the excitement of having her back with actually wanting a life with her. Margaret sounded exhausted. Fantasy is easier when someone else is handling all the responsibilities. I understood what she meant. Ethan hadn't missed Olivia while he was with me. He'd missed the version of her that required nothing from him. Margaret's apology was no longer about his breakup. It was about staying silent when she first saw him crossing boundaries. I kept hoping he'd correct it before anyone got hurt. He had countless chances. I know. I hesitated. If you had warned me sooner. Would you have left? Margaret asked. The question stopped me. After a moment, I admitted the truth. Probably not. You loved him, and I used that as an excuse to stay out of it. Her voice softened. I should have told you anyway. I appreciated that she didn't try to defend herself. We were both waiting for him to become someone he had no intention of being. For almost 3 weeks afterward, my phone stayed silent. No emails, no unknown numbers, no letters slipped beneath my door. Life settled into a rhythm of morning runs, work, guitar lessons, and dinners with friends I'd neglected while trying to save a relationship that only one of us had been protecting. Without noticing when it happened, I stopped measuring time by Ethan's absence and started measuring it by everything I'd begun doing for myself. One afternoon, Mia called. I ran into Olivia. How did she look? Like she'd already moved on, Mia said. Apparently, she started talking to another man before things with Ethan officially ended. Let me guess, he was just a friend. Exactly. The irony almost made me laugh. The relationship Ethan had risked everything to pursue collapsed for exactly the same reason ours had. That evening, I opened the last folder of photos from our 3 years together. The first picture showed us on our anniversary. Seconds after it was taken, Olivia had called. Even in one of our happiest memories, she'd been there. Not by accident, by choice. I selected every photo and pressed delete. When the screen asked if I was sure, I answered without hesitation. Yes. 2 days later, Margaret called again. I thought you should know Ethan started therapy. That surprised me. He admitted something, she said quietly. He never believed you'd actually leave. She explained that Ethan had expected me to be angry, argue, and eventually forgive him after he apologized just enough to smooth things over. He told you that? He told his therapist. I drove him to the appointment. Everything finally made sense. The beach trip had never been a breakup in his mind. He'd expected to explore life with Olivia, while assuming I'd still be waiting if it didn't work out. That realization hurt. Not because I still loved him, but because he'd mistaken my loyalty for a guarantee. The following Saturday, I was shopping at the farmer's market when someone quietly said my name. Claire! I turned to find Ethan standing several feet away. He looked healthier than the last time I'd seen him, though the sadness in his eyes remained. I wasn't following you, he said quickly. I just happened to see you. People drifted around us without noticing. I won't keep you long. I considered leaving, then nodded once. 5 minutes. We sat on a nearby bench. After a long silence, Ethan finally spoke. I've spent months blaming everyone except myself. I waited. He looked down at his hands. Then my therapist asked me one question. He raised his eyes to meet mine. If Claire had gone to the beach with an ex-boyfriend while asking you not to call, what would you have believed? Ethan let out a humorless laugh. I couldn't answer. You already knew. I did. He rubbed his forehead. I just didn't want to admit it. He was finally telling the truth without rewriting our history. I kept telling myself nothing physical happened, but that wasn't what destroyed us. No. It was every lie before the trip, the late-night calls, making you feel guilty every time you questioned Olivia. I remember all of it. So do I. His eyes filled with tears. I hated hearing those conversations repeated in therapy. After a long silence, he asked the question I'd expected from the beginning. Is there someone else? Why does that matter? I need to know if I lost you to another man. I shook my head. No. His shoulders dropped with relief. You lost me because of your choices. I deserved that. You did. A moment later he asked, Daniel? I smiled. Daniel was never the issue. Were you too? No. I stopped him before he could finish. He happened to sit beside me on one flight. That's all. He looked down. I spent weeks convincing myself you'd replaced me. I didn't replace you. Then what did you do? I replaced chaos with peace. The answer seemed to hit harder than any accusation. I never realized how much you carried. You never had to. I met his eyes. I carried the parts of your life you didn't want to deal with, from bills and family obligations to difficult conversations and the consequences of your mistakes. I thought carrying everything was what love meant. His voice cracked. I took you for granted. You did. I thought you'd always be there. I know. For months, I'd imagined this conversation would bring satisfaction. Instead, it only showed me how far I'd already moved on. I didn't need him to understand my pain anymore. I'd already survived it. Finally, he asked, Is there any chance? I gently shook my head. No, he nodded before I finished. I thought so. We stood. I really am sorry, Claire. I know. I hope someday you can forgive me. I already have. He looked up in surprise. You have? I forgave you because I didn't want to carry the anger anymore. I smiled. But forgiveness isn't the same as coming back. He nodded slowly. I understand. This time I believed him. I walked toward the parking lot without looking back. This time he didn't call my name, ask me to wait, or promise to change. Some endings don't need one last speech. They only need two people accepting that the story is over. 8 months after Ethan asked for the space, December arrived almost without my noticing. I'd settled into a sunny apartment downtown, filled with plants, books, and choices that belonged entirely to me. At work, the promotion I accepted after Maui brought new responsibilities and a team I loved leading. I no longer hurried home wondering who Ethan was texting, whether dinner would disappoint him, or if expecting honesty made me unreasonable. Stability had become my everyday life, and I discovered that ordinary could feel extraordinary. Daniel and I stayed friends. Every few weeks we'd grab lunch after work or trade book and restaurant recommendations. One Friday, he stopped by my office carrying 2 coffees. I figured you'd forgotten to eat again. I smiled. You're becoming predictable. So are you. As he handed me the cup, he studied me for a moment. You look lighter. Lighter? You used to walk into every conversation expecting bad news. He smiled. Now you don't. I glanced at the coffee. I guess I finally stopped expecting people to disappoint me. He nodded. That's a good place to be. He was right. Not because someone new had changed my life, because I'd finally reclaimed it. A week before Christmas, I received one last email from Ethan. Unlike the dozens before it, this one was brief. Claire, I don't expect a reply. Therapy forced me to face the things I'd spent years avoiding. Thank you for loving me when I made it difficult. I hope your life becomes everything I kept it from being. Take care. There was no excuse, no request, and no attempt to reopen the past. I read it once, then archived it. Some apologies come too late to change what happened, but not too late to acknowledge the truth. That was enough. The holidays passed peacefully. For the first time in years, I wasn't juggling two families or organizing my life around Ethan's comfort. I simply enjoyed them. One quiet Sunday morning in early spring, I stopped at the neighborhood grocery store. As I reached the produce section, I heard my name. Claire! I turned to find Ethan standing beside the shopping carts. He looked different. Not broken, not defeated, just older, calmer, and carrying himself with a quiet humility that had never been there before. He smiled hesitantly. Hi. Hi. How have you been? Good. You. Better. After an awkward pause, he glanced at the tomatoes in my cart. You still buy too many tomatoes. I laughed. You still notice. Some habits never change. The silence between us no longer felt uncomfortable. Months earlier, I would have rushed to fill it. Now I simply let it exist. Finally, he spoke. I used to think freedom meant not answering to anyone. He lowered his eyes. I confused excitement with happiness, and stability with boredom. I kept chasing the idea that something better was always waiting somewhere else. He looked back at me. I never realized I was walking away from the best thing I already had. His words were sincere. Months earlier, they would have shattered me. Now they simply sounded true. I've spent a long time thinking, he said quietly. One thought keeps coming back to me. What is it? He took a slow breath. I didn't understand how valuable peace was until I lost mine. I held his gaze for a moment and smiled. I'm glad you figured it out. So am I? He extended his hand, not to ask for another chance, simply out of respect. I shook it. Take care of yourself, Claire. You too, Ethan. He walked toward the checkout without looking back. I watched him disappear down the aisle. There was no regret, no lingering hope, only gratitude that we'd both survived becoming different people. That evening, I came home with groceries and fresh flowers. Soft music drifted through the apartment as I cooked dinner before carrying a glass of wine onto the balcony. Months earlier, silence had felt like abandonment. Now it felt safe. I thought about the night Ethan told me not to call him. Back then, I believed I'd lost my relationship, my future, and the life we'd planned together. I set my empty wine glass on the balcony railing and looked across the city. Apartment windows glowed one by one as evening settled over the skyline. Somewhere below, people hurried home, couples laughed over dinner, and traffic drifted through the streets like a distant tide. Months ago, I would have been standing here waiting for Ethan to come back. Tonight, I didn't feel like I was waiting for anything. A warm breeze carried the scent of the flowers I'd bought that afternoon. Behind me, soft music still played inside the apartment. I smiled, closed the balcony door, and went back inside. Home had been waiting for me all along. I just hadn't realized I was the one who needed to come back.